When a racist cop targeted an elderly black woman, he thought he could get away with it, but her son's arrival turned the tables in a way he never saw coming. Subscribe to the channel and follow along to see how this powerful story unfolds. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? It was a quiet afternoon in the small town of Maplewood, where the streets were usually peaceful and uneventful. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a 72-year-old African-American woman, was walking home from the grocery store. She carried a small bag of groceries in one hand and her cane in the other. Evelyn had lived in Maplewood her entire life, and she knew almost everyone in the community. She was respected and loved by many, known for her kindness and gentle nature. As she crossed the street, a police car pulled up beside her. Officer Dan Harris, a man in his late 30s with a reputation for being overly aggressive, stepped out of the vehicle. He had been patrolling the area and had noticed Evelyn walking slowly across the street. Instead of offering assistance, he approached her with a stern expression. "Ma'am, you're jaywalking," Officer Harris said, his tone harsh and accusatory. Evelyn looked up at him, confused. "I'm sorry, officer. I didn't realize. I was just trying to get home." Harris didn't seem to care about her explanation. "You need to follow the rules like everyone else," he snapped. "I'm going to have to write you a ticket." Evelyn, who had never been in trouble with the law before, was taken aback. "Officer, I'm just an old woman trying to get home. Please, can't you let me off with a warning?" But Harris was unmoved. He pulled out his ticket book and began writing. As he did, Evelyn tried to reason with him, but he only grew more agitated. Finally, in a fit of anger, Harris grabbed Evelyn by the arm and shoved her against the police car. The force was enough to make her drop her groceries and cane. "Don't you dare resist," Harris shouted, his face red with rage. Evelyn, terrified and in pain, tried to plead with him, but before she could say anything, Harris punched her in the stomach. The blow knocked the wind out of her and she crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. Word of the incident spread quickly through the town. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered around the scene. People were shocked and outraged by what they had witnessed. Among the crowd was Marcus Carter, Evelyn's son. Marcus had been at work when he received a frantic call from a neighbor who had seen the altercation. Marcus, a tall and imposing man in his early 40s, rushed to the scene. When he arrived, he saw his mother on the ground, clutching her stomach and crying. His heart sank and a wave of anger washed over him. He pushed through the crowd and knelt beside his mother. "Mom, are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Evelyn looked up at her son, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, I didn't do anything wrong. He just hit me." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he turned to look at Officer Harris. The cop was standing a few feet away, his face pale and his hands trembling. He had recognized Marcus immediately, and the realization of what he had done was starting to sink in. Marcus stood up slowly, his eyes locked on Harris. "You," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You hit my mother?" Harris took a step back, his bravado gone. I didn't mean to. She was resisting." "Resisting?" Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. "She's an old woman. What the hell is wrong with you?" The crowd watched in silence as Marcus advanced toward Harris. The cop, now visibly shaken, tried to back away, but Marcus was too quick. He grabbed Harris by the front of his uniform and pulled him close. "You think you can just go around hurting people because you have a badge?" Marcus growled. "You think you're above the law?" Harris stammered, trying to come up with an excuse. But Marcus wasn't interested in hearing it. He shoved Harris away, causing the cop to stumble and fall to the ground. The tension in the air was palpable as Marcus Carter, Evelyn's son, confronted Officer Dan Harris. The crowd that had gathered around the scene watched in stunned silence, their collective anger simmering just beneath the surface. Marcus, a tall and imposing figure, stood face to face with Harris, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and determination. The officer who had moments ago been so aggressive and unyielding now looked pale and shaken, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the situation. Marcus's voice was low but filled with intensity as he addressed Harris. "You think you can just go around hurting people because you have a badge?" he demanded, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "You think you're above the law?" Harris, visibly trembling, tried to stammer out an excuse. I didn't mean to. She was resisting." But his words fell flat, drowned out by the murmurs of disapproval from the crowd. No one was buying his weak justification, least of all Marcus. Without warning, Marcus grabbed Harris by the front of his uniform, pulling him close so that their faces were mere inches apart. The crowd gasped, but no one intervened. They knew Marcus wasn't going to hurt Harris, not physically at least. This was about holding him accountable, about making him feel the weight of what he had done. "You hit my mother," Marcus said, his voice trembling with emotion. An elderly woman, someone who has never harmed a soul in her life. And for what? Because she was crossing the street too slowly for your liking? Harris had no answer. His face was a mask of fear and regret, but it was too little, too late. Marcus shoved him away, causing the officer to stumble and fall to the ground. The crowd erupted in cheers, their support for Marcus and Evelyn unwavering. As Harris scrambled to his feet, Marcus turned to address the crowd. "This man assaulted my mother in broad daylight," he declared, his voice strong and clear. "He needs to be held accountable for what he's done. We can't let this go unnoticed." The crowd roared in agreement, their voices rising in unison. They had all witnessed Harris's brutality, and they were not about to let him walk away without facing the consequences. Several people stepped forward to help Evelyn to her feet, offering her water and comfort. She was shaken but unharmed, thanks to Marcus's timely intervention. Harris, realizing that he was outnumbered and that the crowd was firmly on Marcus's side, tried to make a break for his patrol car. But before he could take more than a few steps, Marcus was on him again, grabbing him by the arm and spinning him around. "You're not going anywhere," Marcus said firmly. "You're going to stay right here and face the consequences of your actions." Harris looked around, desperate for some kind of support, but none was forthcoming. The other officers who had arrived on the scene were hesitant to intervene, knowing that doing so would only escalate the situation further. They had seen the video footage and heard the eyewitness accounts, and they knew that Harris was in the wrong. Within minutes, more police officers arrived, their presence adding to the tension, but also bringing a sense of order to the chaos. Marcus explained what had happened, his voice steady and unwavering. The officers listened carefully, their expressions grim. They knew that they had to handle the situation delicately, especially given the anger and frustration of the crowd. After speaking with Marcus and several witnesses, the officers decided to take Harris into custody. He was placed in the back of a patrol car, his face a mask of shame and fear as he was driven away. The crowd watched in silence as the car disappeared down the street, their anger slowly giving way to a sense of relief and vindication. For Marcus, the moment was bittersweet. He was glad that Harris was being held accountable, but he knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, and he was determined to see it through to the end. As he turned to his mother, he saw the pride and gratitude in her eyes, and he knew that he had done the right thing. The reckoning had begun, and it was a moment that would change the town of Maplewood forever. In the aftermath of the shocking incident, the small town of Maplewood was left reeling. The altercation between Officer Dan Harris and Mrs. Evelyn Carter had not only exposed the deep-seated issues of racial bias and police misconduct, but had also ignited a fire within the community. The days that followed were filled with tension, outrage, and a collective demand for justice. The incident quickly became the talk of the town. Word spread like wildfire, and soon the local news outlets picked up the story. The footage of Harris assaulting Evelyn, captured by a bystander on their phone, went viral. The video showed the elderly woman being shoved against the police car and then punched in the stomach, her frail body crumpling to the ground. The public outcry was immediate and intense. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags like #JusticeForEvelyn and #EndPoliceBrutality, and the story gained national attention. The Maplewood Police Department, under immense pressure, was forced to act swiftly. Officer Harris was immediately suspended from duty pending a full investigation. The department issued a public statement condemning his actions and promising transparency in the process. They also announced plans to review their training protocols and implement new measures to address racial bias and excessive use of force. Evelyn, though physically recovering from the ordeal, was emotionally shaken. She had never imagined that something like this could happen to her in her own community. However, she found solace in the overwhelming support she received from her neighbors, friends, and even strangers who reached out to offer their condolences and solidarity. The community rallied around her, organizing peaceful protests and vigils to demand accountability and systemic change. Marcus, Evelyn's son, became a central figure in the fight for justice. His courage in standing up to Harris and holding him accountable had inspired many. Marcus worked tirelessly to ensure that his mother's case was not swept under the rug. He collaborated with local activists, lawyers, and community leaders to keep the pressure on the authorities. He also used his platform to speak out against racial injustice and police brutality, sharing his family's story to highlight the broader issues at play. The legal proceedings against Harris moved quickly. He was charged with assault, misconduct, and abuse of power. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including the viral video, eyewitness testimonies, and the medical report detailing Evelyn's injuries. During the trial, Harris tried to defend his actions, claiming that Evelyn had been resisting and that he had acted in the heat of the moment. However, his excuses fell flat in the face of the damning evidence and the public's demand for accountability. In the end, Harris was found guilty on all charges. The judge, in delivering the verdict, emphasized that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. Harris was sentenced to several years in prison, and his law enforcement career was effectively over. The verdict was celebrated as a victory for justice, but it also served as a stark reminder of the work that still needed to be done to address systemic racism and police reform. For Evelyn and Marcus, the trial's conclusion brought a sense of closure, but they knew their fight was far from over. They continued to advocate for change, working with organizations dedicated to police reform and racial equality. Evelyn, despite her age, became a symbol of resilience and courage, using her voice to inspire others to stand up against injustice. The incident also prompted the Maplewood Police Department to take a hard look at its practices. They implemented new training programs focused on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and community engagement. The department also established a civilian review board to oversee complaints against officers and ensure greater accountability. In the months that followed, the town of Maplewood began to heal. The community came together to address the underlying issues that had allowed such an incident to occur in the first place. Town hall meetings were held, and open dialogues about race and policing became a regular occurrence. While the scars of that day would never fully disappear, they served as a reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right. Evelyn and Marcus, walking through the streets of Maplewood, could now do so with a sense of pride. They had faced adversity head-on and had emerged stronger. Their courage had not only brought justice for Evelyn, but had also sparked a movement for change that would resonate far beyond their small town. And as they looked to the future, they knew that their fight for equality and justice was far from over, but they were ready to keep pushing forward one step at a time.